Hello. Good afternoon and good evening, team. So this is week 5 of the multimedia discussion by Eric Sandoval for MPA 580, Legal and Ethical Issues of the Public Sector, and today is the 12th of April. So let's go ahead and dive into a little brief overview. So before we begin, we'll be diving into a brief introduction and information on why ethics are important for your organization. Followed by that, we want to provide your employees with a brief theoretical foundation on which the ethical practices will be based on. Furthermore, we'll provide employees with an overview of why a code of conduct or ethics of conduct is important for your agency, and briefly provide an ethical scenario that we may encounter, and then we're gonna touch base on how to address it. So first and foremost, if we introduce ourselves to our employees, um, we're gonna want to take a moment to give them a personal welcome to ethics trainings and give them a little rundown of the standardized course and how to ground that material into the reality of the agency that they'll be working for, right? And then we can send our team with a little note, letting them know how ethics isn't just about avoiding wrongdoing, but essentially about 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 making the right decisions even when no one is watching. So in public service, accountability, the integrity, and the transparency are essential, if not crucial. And without them, public confidence it begins to erode, and then our ability to serve effectively becomes compromised. It just begins deteriorating. So we do have a lot to let them know why ethics is important, and essentially every day as public administrators, we're entrusted with public resources, with sensitive informations, and decisions that can directly affect people's lives. And that trust is not automatic. It's earned, right? And all that's able to be maintained through ethical behavior, and not just your actions, but all of our actions reflect not only on ourselves, but on the agency and the government as a whole. So so then being able to put that theory into practice, right? Having that theoretical foundation. We want to touch bases on three little factors that I came across is duty based ethics, consequence based ethics, and virtue ethics. Um, so with duty based ethics, if from essentially we want to break it down as to being able to associate with with what is right, because it is our obligation. It's your obligation. So in government services, that can essentially mean abiding by the policies, the procedures, and especially when it may be inconvenient, right? Because that's when we need to uphold our our duties the most, is when we find it inconvenient. We need to be able to abide by our practices and policies that were institutionalized, right? And then secondly, we have our, as I mentioned, the consequence based ethics, and that's essentially going to focus on the outcomes of our decisions. So we do want to always consider how our actions will impact the public, not just the public, but our colleagues as well, and the communities that we serve. One decision that benefits a group unfairly essentially will harm the public, and then our trust will no longer be accepted. And then with our virtual ethics, it really emphasizes our character, right? Our culture, being honest, fair, and responsible, transparent. All that's is especially important in situations where kind of the policies and rules that set in place may not give a clear answer, but that's what we rely on, our judgment and our integrity. That's when it becomes crucial. And in practice, being able to have the ethical decisions really involves balancing all three of those. Okay. And then furthermore, we have our importance of code of ethics. So to me, this is also another crucial aspect. It's because essentially our code of ethics and code of conduct is essentially how we serve as a foundation, kind of how we operate. So these codes aren't just like documents, they're guiding principles, for everyday behavior. They help us ensure consistency in how we make decisions, how we interact with the public, and handle sensitive situations. Um, they also help us protect. They also help us protect, yourselves, myself, our colleagues, and the organization as a whole. When we do follow that code, it provides us with a clear standard on what to rely on, especially in difficult and uncertain situations. And those are situations which we will eventually all come across, regardless of our positions. You know, um, it also provides clarity on conflict of interest. And I've came across lots of situations of conflict of interest between management and employees, as well as the use of public resources and professional conducts. And then we're gonna bring a little scenario and how we'll address it. Um, let's consider a situation that we might encounter. Uh, it could be, for example, in recruitment aspect, right? If we're reviewing applications for like a public program or contract, uh, and during the process, we recognize a name or someone that we know personally, perhaps a friend, colleague, former colleague, or relative, and they may reach out to us, not on a professional aspect, but personally, kind of informally, right? And asking about the status of our application and offering, you know, additional information outside of the official process, you would say. And to me, essentially, at that moment, we're faced with an extreme potential of conflict of interest. Even if we believe that we're remaining, impartial or bipartisans, the appearance of favoritism will easily come into factor and then and damage as actual biases, right? So I would think, in a situation like that, we would want to address it, as in we would want to kind of immediately disclose that relationship to our supervisor or appropriate chain of command, and regardless to our policy as well, right? Because transparency is key, and in any cases, the appropriate action would be to rescue yourself from the decision making process entirely. So that would be kind of a way that I would go about it. And I know we did exceed our time, so I do thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.